Hello, everyone out there that has dialed us up this morning. I'm Sherry Peterson. I'm here with Diane Beale.
Hello.
Diane has spent her life researching, learning, and gaining new insights into a myriad of topics. She's continually expanded her breadth and depth of understanding. Her business, Expanded Learning, highlighted her lifelong pursuit of knowledge, which has morphed into this amazing wisdom she now holds. I wanted to invite Diane today to share some of her perspectives because I see that she's encapsulated so much of what we don't learn in the mainstream media and what is out there, but sometimes just takes a long time to bring together and make sense from. The people that have gone through Diane's material really believe that it has captivated them and kept them into a kind of a trance state for a long time because it's so interesting with an amazing amount of material that you just don't get elsewhere. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I am so excited about this material, about learning in general. I've just always, as you say, I've always, in fact, for years, I tried to avoid working. Just kept going to school. But what has really fascinated me lately are the anomalies. I started stumbling because I travel a lot. I used to teach Spanish and I've traveled all over Latin America. And I started stumbling on all these things, especially in Peru, that didn't make any sense. And these are all true. These are not legends. These are not myths. These are things like, for example, maybe 20 years ago, this miner who was from Argentina was looking for gold in Ecuador and Peru, and he stumbled on these tunnels, these vast tunnels, which are so amazing. I mean, they're wide. They're sometimes as wide enough for a car to go through. And in these tunnels are all these buried treasures. And this guy goes, wow. Well, he was a bit of a adventurer and a bit of an opportunist. So he decided, you know what? I've discovered these tunnels and I claim them for me. I claim all the tunnels underneath all of Ecuador and Peru for me. And what were in these tunnels were what I found interesting is what they call the Hall of Records. I don't know if you've heard of that, but many cultures talk about somewhere hidden in different places on the planet are these Hall of Records, which give us the real history of the planet, which give a lot of, like you say, a lot of things that are never going to show up in history books. But this Juan Moritz guy was not too interested in the Hall of Records. He was looking for treasures and gold and all. And there are actually pictures of him in these tunnels discovering. So I thought, wow, that is so amazing. And then about the same time, about in the 70s or 80s, there was a man called Father Crespi, who was from Italy and was sent over to be a priest in Peru, in Ecuador. And all of a sudden, and so he shows up in this place where they didn't even speak Spanish. It was a place where they were the natives, the Wari Indians and the other tribes. And eventually he learned to connect with them. And these tribes just started giving him these priceless gifts. Things that came from ancient Egypt, things that were made out of gold, things that looked like there was like an ancient computer system, and there were hundreds, and and so I thought, wow, this is just so amazing. And then we all know about the Nazca lines. What are these symbols all about? Who made them? When did they make them? What's the point? And it goes on and on like that. There's something else up in the mountains in Peru, which are called Pisco holes, which are about 3 feet deep and wide. And they go on for miles up in the mountains. Nobody knows why, nobody knows where. And so I kept looking at all these things, and I thought there's got to be an answer. But the more I dug, the more there were not answers. In fact, there were more questions and more confusion. And I thought, I don't get this. For example, with the Pisco holes, nobody's even tried to figure out what they're all about. with the treasures in the tunnels, church didn't like very much.
Church didn't like this information coming out.
Not at all. And in fact, they said, you've got to stop accepting these gifts from these warrior Indians. And in fact, we're going to confiscate everything.
This is the Catholic Church.
Well, I don't want to offend anybody. But I was so fascinated by the fact that for maybe a decade or two, he continued. He was also very interested in archaeology as well as these people. So he started a museum, and he opened it for people to see all these anomalies, things that came from across the ocean, things that were 10, 20, 30,000 years old, and there was no rhyme or reason. They were just, the Indians just kept giving him these gifts until one day there was a huge arson, and a lot of this, of course, everything that was paper or wood was destroyed, and then the other things that were metal, they could be kind of refurbished. Nobody ever found out why.
Hey, lástima.
Okay,
that is really sad to hear.
Yeah, and then it happened again, after he rebuilt, and then another fire. And then, I don't want to give away too much of the story, but on his deathbed, these truckloads came in and just said, sorry, you don't own this. We're taking it all to the Vatican. And the guy was dying. He was in the hospital dying, and it's quite an image of him, this old man with white hair, but running from his hospital bed. What are you doing with my things? And they're loading all these treasures. And some people say this was as big as any other, the discovery of Troy, for example, hugely. But they disappeared, and they said, sorry, you can't own anything because you are a Salesian priest and you've given a vow of poverty and chastity. So all of that disappeared. And then the Ica stones were something else that I was fascinated with. So here appears in southern Peru, thousands and thousands of stones that are carved. And again, it makes no sense. It shows pictures of ancient peoples looking through a telescope at the stars. It shows animals that are extinct. It shows very sophisticated kinds of surgery. And it's been a real controversy. What are these Ica stones? Now, again, some guy who was a doctor, a surgeon, was fascinated. He started collecting them, set up his museum, but people didn't want to believe that they were really as ancient as they appeared to be. Now, these are hoaxes. They're just carved recently by somebody who was just trying to, swindle and make money. So then I wrote a little story about that. So what I've got here, I guess you'd call it historical fiction, where I was just so fascinated by all these anomalies, and I couldn't find any answers. So I made up a story to the best of my ability to try to figure out what could have been the story of this, and what could have been the reason that these things are there. So.
Okay, it sounds like, I did read this book and I was fascinated by it. I couldn't put it down. So many things that I have read about and learned about are included in this book. And so I did believe that most of it was fact, not fiction. There are those that will read it as fiction, and that's fine too. There's no forcing of people to believe or not believe. But it is a pretty amazing story. Some of the material that you've given, I believe there's pictures. Are there not pictures of the Ica stones?
And this is something that really saddened me. In my original draft, there were pictures of the Ica stones and of many of the places and the items that I was talking about. But it was just impossible to get permission, to get copyright, and so I think what I'm going to do now is start a blog and then or a page, a book page, and start to show some of these pictures, because it makes a lot more sense when you can see what these stones really look like, when you can see what some of these treasures were, when you can see the tunnels themselves.
I think I have seen those on like Ancient Aliens. They had pictures of some of the stones carved.
Yeah.
They must have gotten some permission somewhere. They could have paid a lot of money for them, I don't know. But yeah, that would be good to see some of these facts that are out there, and how wonderful that you brought it all forward so that it can be revisited. You may
I really like what you said about, you can just take this as a piece of fiction and, and leave it at that, or you can see that maybe there are some, just, as so many legends, every culture has so many legends, and my feeling is, where did these come from? We didn't just make them up out of the blue. And cross culture, there's so many, for example, animals that have been genetically modified, and so we have the ancient Egyptian strain with a human body and a lion's head or something like that. And my sense is that maybe people were experimenting, and that's where we got these stories. And the legends of Atlantis and Lemuria and the legends of the Garden of Eden. Every culture has some belief, some sense that somewhere back in the annals of time, hundreds or maybe millions of years ago, we did live in a different society. And of course, so many of the Incas and Maya and many of the native traditions don't talk about linear time. They talk about cycles of time. And so we may have been through these cycles and had to start all over again. And this is pretty much my belief, that Atlantis probably did exist and that Lemuria probably did exist.
That was one of the questions some people have when reading your book. I think in this society, many of us expect a linear perspective, like how many years ago was Atlantis? Where was it? How many years ago was Lemuria? Did they intertwine? But what you said it's true. A lot of it is off the linear map onto more of a matrix of things happening, sometimes simultaneously. In your book, do you refer to Atlantis? At the beginning, I do remember Lemuria. The people were from Lemuria in a very magical society. So do you have a sense of that any of these artifacts that Dr. Crespi came up with or were given came from those time periods that far back?
Possible. And there were things like generators and electric things and computers and stuff like that. And they've been finding things underwater all over the Pacific Ocean, all as far as Madagascar and the Indian Ocean and Indonesia. And so, and this is what's so frustrating is, if we could look at these things and if we could examine them and test them and date them, but poof, they just seem to all disappear.
I've seen a lot of shows where they show the underwater ruins, even 30 miles off the coast of Cuba. There are some amazing ruins, and I don't think, somebody comes around and photographs them and puts them on a documentary, and then that's kind of it. But for those of us that have seen it over and over again, I think there was another one off the coast of Chile. Huge ruins, like giant pyramids and all kinds of buildings. So we have seen pictures of these civilizations under the sea. It also depends upon how far we can go back in our own minds. Since science says, some science says 10,000 years ago, or 10 to 13,000 years ago at the Ice Age, that was kind of the beginning of everything.
Yeah.
That's stretching it from 5,000 years BC, which the Egyptologists talk about. So if you listen to Blavatsky, who says our human civilization has been around for 18 million years, you got to kind of wonder what happened.
Kind of boggles the mind, doesn't it?
5 million, 8 million, 10 million years ago, a lot has happened. And there are those that come and give us some of the history, but of course they are talked about as legends, right? Myths.
Yes.
And so your book, you're saying you are intertwining the facts that you know and the realities of what you come up with from all that you've seen and read and know. Can you give us a little introduction to the storyline? Because that is what captivates many of us that have read this. There's very interesting characters and some of the things, there's also a love story, right?
Yeah. So the prologue does take place in Lemuria. For those of you who don't know about Lemuria, a lot of people have heard of Atlantis, but Lemuria, according to legend and according to my belief, was way more ancient than Atlantis, and it goes back, if not millions, at least hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so in the story, these are the last days of Lemuria because the priestesses had the ability of what they call far sight and could look into the future. And they could see that, you ask about Atlantis. Well, Atlantis was a much younger civilization, but they were much more involved in technology and machines and things, whereas the Lemurians wanted to live in harmony with nature and simply, and in very much connected with source, connected with each other, connected with harmony of nature. But the Atlanteans felt that they were superior because they had all this technology. And I heard this from Rudolf Steiner, I believe it was, who conjectured that the Atlanteans decided they were going to harness this comet and have a space station there from which they could monitor and control the whole Earth. And that's what happened. That was the disaster. They tried that. They hit the comet, and then it forced it off course and caused it to come crashing back into Lemuria, which then caused giant tsunamis. And but the people there knew this was going to happen, and some of them decided to go down with the continent. Some decided to go west to Egypt, and some decided to go east to what is now South America. And I don't know if you've ever wondered, but why is it that these pyramids that we see in Egypt are almost identical to the ones that we see in Latin America? I mean, the proportions, the construction, everything. Very, very interesting. So this is my theory: is that some went east to Egypt and some went to the New World. And so that's the beginning of the story. And then it stops, and then the story starts in present time, where this young scientist from Spain is called to come to Ica, Peru, because they're so tired of people calling these stones a hoax. And she has invented this method called thermoluminescence, which is a way to date things that don't have organic material, that you can't use carbon dating. So they said, oh, and she had done a lot of research all over Europe and everything. So she comes to do this, but she's very skeptical, and she is also a little bit bitter because she's had some difficult experiences. She's very ill, and she's been really messed over in her career and in her romance. So she comes to study and to test these stones. And the young man who is the son of the collector, Rogelio, these are the two main characters, and they have this kind of like two north magnetic poles. They have this attraction but this repulsion from each other. And as part of their study, they end up going to all these places to try to figure out, well, why are some of the images on the Nazca lines the same images as on the stones? And then they stumble into this healer, and she tells them about that they need to go to this strange place called Cueva de los Tallos, and they need to go to Lake Titicaca. And so it's a bit of an adventure story as well as I've tried to weave in the facts without it being too, too preachy or too anything like that. So they have a bunch of adventures, and they do find their way into this tunnel, which nobody has been able to find, but this healer, Cantu, from Nazca, who is a native, tells them that if they can figure out these hieroglyphs, they can get into the tunnel. And these tunnels are where they think they can find not just the treasures, but the hall of. May I read a little passage from that?
Oh, yeah, please do. I hate for you to give too much of the book away because it's so rich and delicious. I want people to experience it for themselves. But
yeah.
Please do. What have you got for us?
Well, I just lost it. Yeah, I just undid it, I think. So you might have to stop it. I had a place mark right here, and then as soon as I flipped it, it flipped right off.
Okay.
The tunnel was wider, blacker, and colder than they had anticipated. It was musty and smelled of decomposing flesh. Rogelio held his torch in one hand and took Sophia's arm with the other. Be very, very careful. It feels like the floor is covered with something wet and slippery. And Yuck! And what are the items scattered on the ground? Probably better that you don't know, he replied grimly. Sophia was making her way gingerly, sliding her hand along the clammy granite wall for support. When she faced the wall directly, the light from her miner's hat illumined a series of hieroglyphs and images of disembodied black hands. He gripped her arm tighter and could feel that she was trembling. And then it goes on, and she starts feeling this sense of something following her. At that moment, she tripped on something and fell to the ground. When she shined her torch on the object, it proved to be a human skeleton covered with gold dust. Oh God, she screamed. Yes, you'd better call to your God, a voice whispered in her ear as she felt an arm grasp around the neck from behind, pulling her up, and then something sharp pressed against her back. She looked over at Rogelio. He was being assaulted in the same way. And it goes on and on.
Okay, so they're down in these underground tunnels. They find their way down in there. Could any of those tunnels be connected with other tunnels from other countries, or are these just localized tunnels that you're talking about?
I have the feeling, and from what I've read, is that there are a series of tunnels spanning the globe, in Europe and in the Russian territories. These that I know are connected at least across Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. And they found that in Cusco, which was the ancient capital of the Incas, right underneath what used to be their ancient temple, and then of course it became a Christian church. But if you go down into the bowers of that area, you find yourself in a tunnel which then connects you to these tunnels and all the way across. Of course, you can't get in anymore because it's too dangerous.
I did see an episode on YouTube with Emery Smith, who was called as a researcher into a deep tunnel near Ica? No, not Ica. Near
Cuenca?
Ecuador? Yeah, Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any of that, and if that is somehow connected to some of this underground material? Because that was more about ETs, I believe, a ship or some gold or some kind of material that they found there that was very luminescent.
I did not see that, but I know that he did research on bodies that were very small, and that they were trying to figure out where they came from and what kind of DNA they had. And, I think if there's anything that I learned from all this research is that what I thought I knew was like this, and with the 5 years of research, it expanded. But now I realize that what I think I know now is still 1/10 of 1% of what's out there, both in terms of, historically and other dimensions. And it's just no end of fascination.
Isn't it true? So I'm wondering if some of your readers don't really believe in other terrestrials or under this earth, anything. Is there some evidence to show that this could be off-planet in any way, or is this not about off-planet beings?
I don't really discuss the off-planet so much. There's a lot of implications, like, my goodness, who in the world built these pyramids? Because at the time they were supposed to have been built both in Egypt and in Peru and Mexico. The civilization and the local civilization, there's no way that they could have done it because they were going around in little canoes and, subsisting off of the land. But the indications with the pyramids, for example, I mean, just from a scientific viewpoint, it was really clear that they understood about natural energies of the sun and how to harness them, and how the pyramidal shape was very powerful in enhancing those powers and those energies. And then I actually, when they get into the Hall of Records later on in the book, these records talk about ancient history and ancient suppressed information and then within the last 50, 100 years, suppressed energies, suppressed powers, suppressed ways that we could, if they hadn't been taken away from us, we could be living a paradise now. Free energy for everyone, enough food, enough shelter, enough warmth. But the powers that be certainly just didn't want those. They had, one man found a way, they did a 90-day study to cure cancer. He cured 100% of the cancer. And they had doctors watching, and they had people watching. And let's remember his name. And when it was all, he called it, that was Wilhelm Reich. He called it orgone energy because he knew that this energy connected everything. After 90 days of trials, 100% curing of cancer, guess what? The pharmaceuticals weren't too happy about that, nor the hospitals, nor the surgeons.
I can't imagine.
And so all of a sudden, not only was he poisoned, all his research was destroyed, all of the evidence was destroyed, and even though this orgone energy had done so much, they made it official that orgone energy simply does not exist. And it made me very angry to keep kind of coming across these kinds of things. And I'm sure that most people are aware of a lot of those kinds of things, but I dug a little deeper and found more things, and it was really frustrating. And I felt like it's important to get this information out so people can decide, what, if anything, they want to do about it.
Well, you're very brave to put it out there with your name on it, I have to say.
Well, I'm getting up there in age, so I don't have that too many years left anyway.
Not that old. So hopefully you are protected by your beings around you and not have to worry about the fate of so many that have come up with these things.
Yes, it is a bit frightening.
So there were some of these beings under the ground that were, I don't remember if they were another dimension, but we won't go into the final curtain because we want people to be engaged and find out for themselves what happened. But do you have any final comments about the book? Is it an ebook? Where can people get it?
It is a book, both an ebook and a paperback, and they can get it on Amazon or Google or anything. We're having for the next month. I'm not that interested in trying to make a fortune or fame or fortune. I really would just be very happy if people would read it. So for the next month, I'm making it available as an ebook for 99 cents, and people can just go on and download it. And as I say, I'm hoping to try to get some pictures up so people can have a richer idea of what some of these images and items were that were discovered and disappeared. So,
well, we look forward to hearing from you again. I know you have many areas that you have been involved with over time. We'll be doing a video on one of your favorite nonprofits.
Yes.
Which you might want to just mention and give an address for people to look up.
Yeah, this is an organization called Her Future Coalition, and one of my passions is the way that, in general, women are treated, but especially the poorest of the poor, and especially all over the world, basically. We happen to work in India, Nepal, and Thailand with girls who have survived trafficking and sex slavery. And so we help rebuild their lives, and we visit them, we give them health care, we give them a way to make training, job training, and education if they want it. So it's called Her Future Coalition. It's all one word, herfuturecoalition.org. Okay. And we just got funding from the Michelle Obama Foundation to help educate the girls.
This is such an incredible group of people that are doing such needed work. This is probably one little part of the world because the slavery is everywhere in the United States as well. But this work, go fund them.
This is how that foundation works with Michelle Obama. It's going to be a GoFundMe, and then when it gets launched, and we'll let people know about it. And it'll be
Okay.
So we're
Thank
excited.
you, Diane, for coming and sharing your incredible material with us. You won't be disappointed if you read this. It'll be really exciting.
Thank you, Sherry. It was very much of a pleasure.
Great.
Bye-bye. Even better.